The warm glow from the chandeliers reflected softly off the polished silverware as quiet conversations and the faint clink of glasses wove through the air. It was the kind of restaurant that seemed to belong to another world, a world where time slowed and elegance reigned. Ethan Carter sat quietly in one of those corner booths, his elbow resting on the table, fingers idly tapping the crisp linen that covered it. A man who had made his name and fortune in the tech world, who had been featured on magazine covers, hailed as a visionary, a genius, someone who seemed to have it all. Yet tonight, none of it mattered. Not a single accolade or dollar could change the helplessness he felt in this moment. Across from him sat Oliver, his 8-year-old son, whose brown eyes flickered between curiosity and frustration. The boy's world was smaller than most, confined by a body that refused to cooperate. Cerebral palsy had made sure of that. Every small movement took effort. Every simple task turned into a struggle. Ethan watched him now, saw the difficulty as Oliver tried to maneuver his fork, trying so hard to do something most people took for granted. Eating his own dinner. It was supposed to be a special night, just the two of them, no business meetings, no phones buzzing in his pocket, no team members waiting on decisions, just a father and his son trying to have dinner like any other pair. But Ethan felt it slipping away, the connection he wanted so badly to make, as Oliver's small hands fumbled again and the boy let out a sigh, defeated. Ethan glanced around, looking for help. He wasn't used to asking for it, but tonight he needed it. A few moments later, she arrived, their waitress. Young, maybe mid-20s, with green eyes that seemed to hold an understanding far beyond her years. Her name tag read Emily. And it wasn't just the way she crouched down beside Oliver's chair, or the way she spoke to him softly, that caught Ethan's attention. It was how natural it all felt. No awkwardness, no pity, just kindness. "Hey, sweetheart," she said gently, as though they were old friends. "Having a tough time with that?" "Ha!" Oliver nodded, his frustration melting into something more vulnerable. Tears welled in his eyes, but he quickly blinked them away. Emily didn't wait for permission. She pulled up a chair, set her tray aside, and without fuss, cut his food into small bites. Then she helped him, steadying his fork, guiding him with patience, but never taking over. She talked to him, really talked. Asked him about his favorite cartoons, laughed when he told her about his dream of flying to the moon, of becoming an astronaut. He told her about the stars, how he loved them, how he knew the names of the constellations. And she listened, as if he were telling her something that mattered. Ethan sat back in his chair silent, watching the two of them. He'd hired experts before. Therapists, caregivers, all the best money could buy. But he'd never seen anyone reach Oliver like this. Emily didn't treat him like he was fragile. She didn't look at him with sympathy. She just saw him, and that, more than anything, made Ethan's chest ache. By the time the meal was finished, Oliver was smiling. Not the kind of forced smile Ethan sometimes coaxed out of him with gifts or promises of something fun later. A real one. His laugh had echoed through the booth, soft and free. For the first time that evening, Ethan realized he wasn't thinking about what came next. Not the next business deal, not the next therapy appointment, not the next strategy meeting. He was just there, present, and his son was happy. Emily stood, giving Oliver a wink before disappearing back into her rhythm of work. Like it was nothing, like she hadn't just changed everything. Later, as Ethan stood at the counter to pay, he saw her again. This time she wasn't smiling. She was speaking with the manager, her tone hushed but serious. Ethan wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but he couldn't help catching a few words. Something about extra shifts, something about tuition, something about her siblings. His curiosity piqued. He motioned for the manager after Emily walked away. "Tell me about her," Ethan said. The man sighed, glancing toward the kitchen where Emily had disappeared. "She's one of the best we've got," he said. "Puts herself through school. Works doubles more often than not. She's raising her younger brother and sister. Their parents, well, they passed away a couple of years back. She doesn't complain, just keeps going." Ethan felt a weight settle in his chest. He knew something about responsibility, but he had never shouldered it without a support system, without resources to make the burden lighter. She had none of that. And still, she found time to sit with a little boy and make him feel like the most important person in the room. That night, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just met someone extraordinary. Not because of anything dramatic, because of something simple. And sometimes, he thought, simple things were the most powerful. The next day, Emily showed up for her shift, tying her apron in the back, checking her notepad, ready to dive back into the routine that had become her life. But before she could step onto the floor, the manager called her into his office. She blinked, confused. He only nodded toward the door. Inside, Ethan Carter stood waiting. He rose when she entered, holding an envelope. It wasn't thick enough to be alarming, but heavy enough that she hesitated. "Mr. Carter," she asked, uncertain. "I wanted to thank you," he said, "for last night, for the way you treated my son." His voice softened. "You reminded me of something I'd forgotten." She shook her head. "You don't have to thank me. He's a great kid." Ethan smiled faintly. "He is, and I want him to grow up believing the world is full of people like you." He held out the envelope. She stared at it but didn't take it. "What is this?" she asked. "Your tuition," he said, "paid in full. And enough for your siblings, too." Her breath caught. She took a step back. "I can't accept that." "You can," Ethan said quietly, "because I know you'll do something good with it, and because I want my son to understand that kindness deserves to be repaid." Her hands shook as she reached for the envelope. She opened it and then closed it quickly, as if afraid it would disappear if she looked too long. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say you'll keep being who you are," Ethan said. "That's enough." And in that moment, standing in a tiny office that smelled faintly of floor polish and old paperwork, Emily realized something had changed. That one small moment of kindness had come back to her, tenfold. Ethan left the restaurant that night without ceremony. No cameras, no headlines, just a quiet sense that he'd made the right choice. Because sometimes the best investments weren't about profit margins or market shares. Sometimes the best investments were in people. And sometimes those people reminded you of who you used to be, who you still could be.